Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us to discuss the Maximum Import Capability Enhancements Draft Final Proposal and Draft Tariff Language today. My name is Isabella Nicosia, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs, and I'll be facilitating the web conference today. I'm also joined on the line by our two presenters. We have Catalin Mixa, Senior Advisor Regional Transmission Engineer, as well as Jordan Pinev, our Senior Counsel, on the line. And then we also have Milos Botanek from Market and Infrastructure Policy, as well as Jeff Billington, our Director of Transmission Infrastructure Planning. So just a few housekeeping reminders before we get started today. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only, and any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. The meeting is structured to stimulate dialogue and engage different perspectives, and while we always welcome feedback and comments, just a reminder to please keep those professional and respectful. And then lastly, just please try to be brief and refrain from repeating what has already been said so that we can manage the time efficiently and address as many questions and comments as possible. The presentation, the paper, and the draft tariff language have all been posted to the MIC Enhancements webpage on the California ISO website. And a comments template should be available out there shortly as well. There are some new instructions for raising your hand to ask a question. So if you connected to audio through the computer and had the WebEx call you, you'll select the raise hand icon, which is located just on the right-hand side above the chat window. That will raise your hand and enter you into the queue. But however, if you did connect to audio separately from the WebEx, and use the dial-in information, you'll need to press #2, and then that will enter you into the question queue. And we'll repeat those instructions when it's time for questions. If you need any technical assistance during today's meeting, you can send a chat to the event producer. Her name is Shreyas. And then when asking your question, please remember to state your name and affiliation before making your comment. You can also send a question via the chat to all panelists or to myself. Again, my name is Isabella Nicosia. Again, for the chat, if you are going to use that to enter your question, please be sure to provide your affiliation or organization name in there as well. So this slide shows where we are at in the policy initiative stakeholder process. So we are right here in the draft final proposal stage of proposal development. The agenda for today's call, we're going to start off with an introduction and then just cover some references and the purpose of the stakeholder initiative. Then we will address the stakeholder comments that we received after the revised straw proposal, and then we'll move into the topic, so improving transparency, inclusion of contractual data from non-CPUC jurisdictional LSCs into the policy portfolio. Then we'll cover some information related to the MIC expansion request, as well as the Step 13 priority to existing RA contracts. And then we'll discuss the tariff and reliability requirements, BPM, alignment of terms. And then at that point, we'll stop for some open discussion before moving into the draft tariff language. So at that time, I'll share the draft tariff language that was posted, and we'll go through that. And then finally, we will wrap up today's call with the initiative schedule and then some next steps. So with that, I will hand it over to Catalin, and we'll get started with the introduction.
Thank you, Isabella. Good afternoon, everybody. This slide is just a reminder. Usually we get a few new people every stakeholder call. So maximum import capability represents deliverability for external resources coming at the intra-tie, and that has to be done. It's a simultaneous deliverable amount to the aggregate of load. The studies are, there's a single study done for the deliverability at intra-tie, which is MIC, and the deliverability for internal resources. Next slide, please. These are just some references. If you're new to this process, please go through these references to familiarize yourself. Next slide. As we all know, we wanted to discuss and explore stakeholder concerns we got in the last couple of years and suggestion how to improve this process. We do need new tariff language and BPM language before June in order to implement something for 2023 RA year. So we'll be moving forward with your comments that we have received after the August 17th stakeholder call regarding revised draft proposal. We received 12 sets, and some of the sets were from multiple parties. I'm going to summarize those in the next few slides, but basically based on that information, we are moving forward with 5 items. These are the 5 items we're moving forward with. And I'm going to talk about individually about them a little later. But we're going to move forward with additional transparency and inclusion of the non-CPU unit LLC in the policy portfolio, request for MIC expansion, and then proposed improvements to step 13, also clarification and cleanup language to the tariff and BPM practice manual. What we're not going to move forward with, we're not going to move forward at this point in time with changes in the MIC calculation to account for liquidity. While we have received mostly positive comments, we can move forward because we have shortcomings in the actual technical data required to implement such proposal. And I'm going to go into details in each one of those, including the one we're not moving forward with. So basically, improving transparency. So what exactly we're planning to make publicly available? So we're planning to make sure that we have the most up-to-date owners of all MIC allocations at the branch group level. You would have a total megawatt. You'll have a contact person. You'll have megawatts available for trade. We're trying to figure out if we can get this done directly to CIRA, or it might end up being in Oasis, but pulled from CIRA, no less than once daily. So we're trying to figure out how to make all this data as useful as possible to not just improve transparency, but improve trading as well. Also, we provide to make an aggregate, reports available of usage. So not only that you would know who has how much MIC, but you will also know on aggregate, not by LSE, but on aggregate, you would know how much was used on each branch group based on the year ahead and the month ahead showing. We did got your comments back, and more than half of you wanted to see all the 3 numbers. So we're moving forward presenting 3 numbers. Just for everybody to know, there are about 77 LSEs right now. They're almost half UC jurisdictional, half not UC jurisdictional. So there's a lot of aggregation there. So we'll be presenting a overall number for all the LSEs, and there'll be below that most likely will be a split for how much PUC jurisdictional and how much non-PUC jurisdictional. Next slide. So on the contractual data, non-PUC jurisdictional LSEs to be included in the policy portfolio. Here, the problem we're trying to solve is that the policy portfolios coming from the PUC are done at the macroeconomic and renewable information data, especially for stuff coming from out of state. And it lacks into details exactly on what branch group is going to come. I might tell you it's coming from New Mexico, but it doesn't tell you what is going to get scheduled, what branch group is going to get scheduled on. So what we intend to do here, we intend to collect more refined data from non-PUC jurisdictions, LSCs, because most of them are reluctant to give that data directly to the CPUC. Now, we were not specific before. Well, what we intend here is to let you know what we like to make public, basically make public, not make public, but give to the PUC the data so we can catalog. We're planning to give out the same data as we're making public today on the ISO website about all the ETCs, TOR, pre-RM commitments, and new use simple commitment. This is the data that we're publishing there today. The LSC name, the contractual amount, branch group, and expiration date. We understood from your comments there were at least a couple of stakeholders who had some confidentiality concerns. If you believe these, 4 items over here are confidential, then, please tell us how do you propose that we mitigate confidentiality concerns. If a contract is like further away, it's signed now, but it's only active like maybe 5 years from now, we might need to give the start date, but we're not really sure on that. At least these 4 for sure, we want to make them public. When I say public, give them to the CPUC in order to be included in the policy portfolio. Next slide, please. Maybe I should stop here. Let's stop after the first 2 and take comments on the first 2, and then we can move forward with the next couple of items. Otherwise, that will add up just too much. I already see a few questions.
Yes, I do see a couple of callers in the queue. Moving on to the first caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley. Is it me?
Yes, Carrie. Hi.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Catalin. This is Carrie Bentley with the Western Power Trading Forum. I had a question on slide 11 and then one on slide 12. On slide 11, can you clarify what you mean by not moving forward with it due to deficiencies in technical data? Can you just give some more color?
Yes, I'm going to have another full slide just to talk about this one. We'll get
okay.
back to you at that.
Perfect, thank you. And then on page 12, this is the next slide, can you clarify whether you're going to be posting it as individual LSE data or only in aggregation?
Okay, which item? Item 1 or item 2? Item 1 is LSE data, so you would know exactly what LSE has, what allocation on what branch group, so you would know who to call if you need to buy some MIC allocation on certain branch groups. We'll include the contact person for that. So item 1 is LSE specific. Item 2 is not LSE specific. Item 2 will provide an aggregate usage. So this is after the showings are coming in. So let's say the showings are in at T-minus 30, they have to be final. So by around T-minus 29, T-minus 28, you would know exactly how much was used on each branch group on aggregate basis. So let's say the branch group, it's good for 1,000 megawatts, and you would see people, LSE, whatever the showings are, the showings coming into the ISO, total 800 megawatts, 500 for PUC jurisdictionals and 300 for non-PUC jurisdictionals.
Is there a reason why that can't be by LSE? Today, I think you showed just a solid yes, no, whether they used all of it on their annual plan. And that's helpful because then you could see who uses it year after year, and it kind of narrows down the list of who to call when you're looking for MIC. But it would be even more helpful if you knew who was using it all and who wasn't.
Yeah, so we did ask of this in the previous iterations, and the overwhelming majority of the LSEs did not want to see the individual data. It was like over 80% of people responding said they don't want to see the data on LSE by LSE basis.
Is there another reason, though, besides LSE preference? I mean, I understand that some load serving entities may not want to be more transparent, but, to me, this seems like not a by vote situation, but what's best for the market situation.
Well, it would seem to me that if you publish everything, all their showings, it's kind of publishing their entire showings from outside the ISO. And personally, I don't have a problem. I think a lot of people will have a problem publishing exactly what their showings are coming from the outside the ISO. You'll see every line item for every branch group, for every LSE. I don't think that's where most people want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of see that, but I think maybe there'd be a compromise in showing it for the annual. I mean, after all, today you could see by branch group every single LSE that's used all their allocation or none of it. So we'll comment on it, but it would be nice if people could consider a medium transparent ground there. Thanks, Catalin.
Sure.
Moving on to the next caller. Just a reminder that you'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. Unmuting the next caller. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, it's Ellen Wolf from Rosero Consulting. Can you hear me, Catalin?
Yes, Ellen, hi.
Hi, I wanted to ask about the non-jurisdictional CPUC data collection and building that into the portfolio. It seems between the CAISO and the CPUC, there's a little bit of ambiguity, and maybe your next proposal here is trying to clarify that. But do you have a sense of the timeline for this? Because the CPUC is finalizing their portfolios now. They've issued draft portfolios already and plan to take comments on those by next week and then turn the final portfolios. So do you expect this is going to be able to happen quickly to get them that information to build the balance of the non-jurisdictionals into their portfolios?
No, not unless you send the data directly to them. I mean, you are welcome to send directly the data to them, but this is not going to happen fast here. We are scheduled to go to the November board meeting. After that, we need to finalize the tariff and BPM language. We need to file with FERC. We need to get FERC approval. So it will not be live until sometime early next year.
But this transmission of non-jurisdictional RA resource plans for the portfolios is not necessarily something you're having to build into the tariff to do, right? So it's if non-jurisdictionals do want to work to get their resource plans in the portfolios, you're saying they should work directly with the CPUC at this point, or what?
Since at this point in time we don't really have a process to take these into account, I would suggest that at this point in time, if you want them in there, you should probably give them directly to the PUC at this point in time.
And do you have a recommendation of who at the PUC is the right person to do that with? Because at least the ones I've been working with have been reaching out, but the PUC doesn't really seem especially equipped right now either to take that input. So if you have somebody that you'd recommend that organizations talk to, that'd be helpful.
At this point in time, I don't have anybody. We'll have to reach to the PUC and see who the appropriate person is.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had on these slides. Appreciate it.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, Catalin. This is Chris Devon from Customized Energy Solutions. Can you hear me all right?
Hi, Chris. Yes, we can hear you fine.
Yeah, I was curious on slide 13. I think I might have a different version of the slide deck here. I apologize. You haven't gone through that information on the make expansion request. This is just the transparency stuff. So I'm going to lower my hand and jump in later. I apologize.
Okay, no problem. That's next, Chris. We'll talk about that next.
I do not see any further callers in the queue as of now.
All right, thank you, everybody. So let's get into that. If we make expansion requests these mixed expansion requests will be coming directly to the ISO. This is not the policy portfolio that to be included in the policy portfolio. So this is new. We currently in the tariff, we do not allow anybody to make expansion requests. We would be changing that. We would be allowing either LSCs who have RA contracts that are not already used as pre-RA import commitments and new use import commitments. We already know what those are in their catalog. So if you have any other RA contract, we would be willing to expand MIC to make sure we have enough to cover all the contracts. Also, if they're new owners of new transmission or they're connecting to the ISO-BA or right next to the ISO-BAA, or any other stakeholders that has some contractual financial commitments towards serving ISO internal load, we would be willing to receive your request for MIC expansions. Now, these requests, again, if we do expand MIC based on this request, it adds all ISO ratepayer costs. So there is no, just because you're requesting it, that does not convey any special right during market scheduling, market operation, or during the annual MIC allocation process. This is just to make sure that each branch group has enough megawatts to cover all the contracts. So if we have MIC available, then we'll make it available immediately. If we don't have MIC available, then we might have to take a while until it gets available. Maybe we need some transmission upgrades or something else that we're waiting for. Some transmission might already be approved for that, and then we might have to wait a little bit to make that increase, but we can make those available. Next slide, please. So if deliverability is not available, basically their request most likely will get denied. Now the ISO, the only thing that's moving forward, part of this stakeholder initiative, let me be very specific, is that the ISO, at its own latitude, if it's economic, believe it's economic or some other best way for the ratepayers, you can move forward with some of these upgrades, but they'll have to be justified like any of the upgrade we justify today. ISO can do that, but at this point in time, even though we agree in principle that we can open it up for customer paid studies and customer paid upgrades, all of that, the framework, the process, the rights conveyed to third party or customer paid transmission upgrades are not moving forward at this point in time through the stakeholder process. It will be considered in a larger context of other current initiatives. So basically what that means is that if we can pick it up in another stakeholder process that we have going on right now, we would. If we cannot, then there'll have to be a new stakeholder process starting most likely next year. So that's all that we want to convey here is that the part that we'll be moving forward right now, because it's easier to implement and the tariff language is rather small for that. We would move forward with ISO ratepayer paid increase requests for MIC expansion, not with customer paid for transmission upgrades. Next slide. Okay, I see I already have 3 questions. Maybe I should stop here and get the questions first. Sorry, Isabella. Let's go back one. Let's open for questions.
As a reminder, you'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. Moving on to the first caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hey, Evelyn. It's Chris Devin from Customized Energy Solutions again. So I had a couple of questions on this whole process for these MIC expansion requests and what it really means as far as the ratepayer funded part goes. Understand you guys are going to look at the potential for like the third party funded, part of that outside of this initiative. But I'm just curious because I don't quite follow the concept, I guess, for the ratepayer funded one, because if it's going to be funded through the TPP, I guess the most simplified version of the question is are you guys going to simply continue to use the existing project study analysis and approaches, the policy, reliability, and economic approaches that you have existing to study these?
Yes, we'll continue.
Okay.
Everything that we have will continue. Basically, what this is meant to do is meant to make sure that we have enough MIC at each branch group to cover people's already financial commitments that they have on a certain branch group. The overall number covers whatever it's signed today into existence.
Okay, so in that sense, you might be considering something a little bit different in the study process, where if you're really getting a request from someone who says, hey, I have this financial agreement already in place, or looking to do this financial agreement, some kind of a contract for import RA on this branch group, then will the things like benefits of that MIC expansion to meet those needs be monetized in some way? Is there going to be some kind of a reduced capacity cost or reduced RA cost or something calculated along those lines, or something that goes into the benefits to actually get these projects approved above and beyond just the simple existing framework that we have through the TPP?
No, there will not be a different framework than what we already have through the TPP. So what we're trying to say here is that if maybe there is a situation where deliverability is still available, if we can just increase the number to make sure that we can cover the contract. So nothing needs to be paid additionally to what it is there today. Or maybe we already have scheduled an approved transmission project through the existing means, and that could increase make for a certain branch group, and people demonstrate they have a need for that beyond what the numbers are there today. That could be accomplished really easily. If we need to propose additional MIC expansions just because of this, then the ISO would kind of get the burden of justifying that increase based on everything that we have today. It will have to be economic. It will have to be justified, not just because somebody submitted an increase request.
Okay. Yeah, I try to read through the paper and understand a little bit more of the details on this when there needs to be an additional enhancement or reinforcement, an actual project approved to DPP. It just seems to me like this is maybe just doing a little bit of lip service and not quite really doing anything in the sense of, I don't know how this is going to identify any new projects. I mean, because these things would already be identified through the economic or reliability projects piece of it,
yes.
I would think,
Great.
right? I mean, so, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, let me stop you right here. This is not meant to find any new type of transmission project increase. This is meant to give deliverability up to the intertie if there is anything available. It was very little geared towards new buildup. The new buildup is still based on all the approved methodologies that we have. This was meant to make more available at the center branch group if there is something available, or when there's something available comes along, like an already approved transmission projects based on some other means.
Okay. I guess I just read the paper incorrectly then, because it seemed to me like you guys were trying to open up a new process for actually requesting transmission projects be considered and approved through the TPP. What I'm hearing is you're saying that that's not going to happen. But I guess on this slide 15, it says, folks can request a facility study, and then actually, if the CAISO identifies that it's economic or in the best interest of ratepayers, then they would reimburse the cost of the study and pursue those. So it seems like it is expanding the TPP. I guess I'm a little bit confused. Sorry.
Again, Chris, that's for customer-paid transmission upgrades, which we're not moving forward with, and we need to split this in two.
Okay. I'm sorry. I hear you now, Kevin. I got it. Okay. So that part is only for in the future if there wasn't deliverability available, then we're going to consider this broader change under this other aspect for customer-paid transmission upgrades, and those requests and those things aren't going to go through necessarily through the TPP under the 3 primary study analyses, that sort of thing. That would be a separate process that we'd have to develop outside of this initiative. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. I was just reading it incorrectly. I apologize. I think I understand it now better. I'll stop there with my questions. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley.
Hi, Carrie. I heard you.
Misunderstanding. Oh, can you hear me?
You're cutting in and out.
Oh, how about now? Can you hear me okay? No? Okay.
Carrie, we cannot hear you.
You can't hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. Please go ahead.
Oh, okay. All right, great. Thank you. So Carrie Bentley, Western Power Trading Forum. I just wanted to say first that I had the same misunderstanding as Chris. So that would be helpful, I think, maybe to be a little further clarified going forward. And then just a quick question. When you were doing the initial MIC availability check, will you make it an option to potentially shift MIC between branch groups? Or will you solely look whether there's additional deliverability at a single branch group. I'm just a little confused on the process since there's so, the deliverability is so linked between the different branch groups.
Yeah, we're not trying to override the methodology that we have. We're not trying to subtract from any branch group where the methodology calls for a certain megawatt amount. It will still be there. We're trying to increase MIC at another branch group where we have too many contracts. Basically, this is not shifting. It's just increasing certain branch group based on some commitment.
Okay, and then is there going to be any criteria on how firm the commitment is? Just because of the chicken and egg problem, that if you want to develop a project, you want to ensure it has RA, but you're not going to move forward with it with a firm contract unless you have the RA. So I'm wondering whether there's going to be any restrictions on the type of contract in order to request the expanded MIC.
Yeah, we don't have those details yet, but we assume that the financial commitments somebody has to be financially committed. These are not, I wish to, look there. This is not what this means. And we believe today we have quite a few LSCs that have actually already signed RA contracts that there's not enough room at certain branch groups, and they just want to make sure that there is enough room, and then the trading will occur, through some other steps, but at least that we have enough room at certain intertypes to make sure that whatever is financially committed fits. This was what it is meant for, not for speculative increases of MIC.
Okay, thank you.
On to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's Ellen Wolf with Rosero Consulting again. Catalin, I had a few questions on this that are pretty narrow. It might be easier to start on the previous page where you talk about eligibility. When you talk about owners of a new transmission, by new, would it also be transmission that's in development?
Sure.
New seems a little bit infinitesimal, so I would think it'd be more relevant to projects that are in development and will be operable in the near future. So that, I think I heard you say, sure, that's something that maybe you would reconsider in how the tariff language is drafted currently.
Yes, and we can have a wider tariff language, and we can specify in the BPMs exactly what you mean by that. But yeah, I believe you're on the right track here. Basically, any kind of transmission coming up to the ISO, to the BAA.
All right, and another question on that point. It says immediately adjacent to the grid, and that also seems a little problematic. I imagine the intent is that the resource could be delivered to the CAISO grid. It seems like you could be in a BAA immediately adjacent but not have transmission service to the boundary, or you could be in a BAA that's not immediately adjacent but have really firm service to the grid. So would you consider modifying that to include rather some reference about one having transmission service all the way to the CAISO grid and not strictly being immediately adjacent necessarily?
Yeah, if you have some specifics, please send them to us. We are willing to look at any one of those. What we were thinking about, okay, so somebody builds a major 500 kV line that comes right next to the border, like one bus away from the ISO, and the choke point wasn't actually inside the ISO, was actually outside. So now there is a lot more capacity coming on that branch group. Then maybe we should, increase our size, our deliverability from that, because there's more resources coming over. So that's what we were thinking about. But if you have some specific language you want to propose, send it over. We can take a look.
Okay, thanks. And one more question on the next slide about deliverability not being available. I can imagine the possibility where the availability amount is not as much as a request. Would you consider partial accept?
So we can based on the request, we can make available as much as we can, of course, if somebody, not somebody, but let's say all the LSCs are sending, a few LSCs are sending rest to the same branch group, and all of a sudden we need to increase 500 megawatts, but there is only 200 megawatts available. We'll make that 200 megawatt available, and the other 3 we cannot, and we might have to wait for a few more years until some transmission projects come in place to increase it further, but at least we can make the 200 megawatts available.
Okay, so there'd be sort of a mechanism to partially deny and partially accept then?
Yeah, I think there should.
Okay, thank you. That's all I had on this. Thanks.
Not see any further callers in the queue as of now.
Okay, thank you.
As a reminder, you can enter the question queue by pressing the raise hand icon located on the right-hand side above the chat window. But if you called in separately to the web conference, you'll need to press #2 to enter the queue.
Thank you. Okay, so another improvement we're going to move forward with is give priority to existing RA contracts under Step 13. So let's be honest, what's happening here is that when Step 13s are coming in, requests are usually in the ISO, in the first second of the first hour when this is opened up for availability. So we don't want to slow the process too much, but we will give on that same day. So as long as you submit the request on that same day and you have an RA contract, then we'll give priority to the RA contract. This RA contract, it can be part of your pre-RA commitment or new use commitment that was denied pre-RA or new use commitment status. We haven't denied anybody yet, but in case we have to deny somebody, like only half the unit can be used because otherwise the LSE will go above so much % of his load share ratio, or somehow the LSE gets mitigated and only can use part of the contract, then the other part can qualify here as well. So any RA contract, either if it was not used as pre-RA import commitment or new use import commitment, or if it was used but part of it denied, can be used for this Step 13. And, so you will get priority for the branch group where you're scheduling this contract. Also, we have changed to, if there is more than one contract for the remaining megawatts on the Step 13, then we would do a ratio between the branch group megawatts available versus the total megawatts requested by all the people with the RA contracts times each individual request. An overwhelming of stakeholders' comments were in favor of this approach versus the first come, first serve basis. So just to be sure we agree what's happening here. So the people with RA contracts will have a priority over everybody else as long as they submit the request on that first day. But still, among everybody else, it's still first come, first serve. So if you do not have an RA contract, the first person will get served before the other people do. So please still submit those as quick as possible. But if you have an RA contract, you don't have to fight to submit it on that first minute of the first hour. You can take that whole day to submit the request in. Next slide, please. So this is just clarifications. We found out that then we need to clean up a little bit the tariff and BPMs in order to be consistent with the currently approved practice. Just as everybody knows, everything that's in RA is down to 2 decimal places. So we're going to go through the tariff and BPM, make sure that we don't have anywhere megawatt increment basis. All the systems, everything that's done today is down to 2 decimal places. And also, it looks like we might have some data that the tariff describes it as it being sent directly to FERC, but we have not done that. We have actually published the data So the whole world, including FERC, gets the data unpublishedly. It's public on the ISO website. So we're just making that change the way current practice it is. All the data is publicly posted and doesn't have to be sent to FERC. FERC can just download it on their own. And that's all I have. That stuff that's moving forward. So if anybody has any questions to this last two items.
As a reminder, if you're connected to the computer audio or use the Call Me feature in WebEx, you may enter the question queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your phone to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question.
Okay, Isabel, let's move to the next slide. So what we're not moving forward at this point in time, we're not moving forward to the changes to the MIC calculation. So basically, we have received positive stakeholder input regarding can we consider somehow liquidity at a certain branch groups. We couldn't find any public data that I could use to quantify what liquidity is. Even the LSEs proposing this methodology acknowledge that they don't have data either. We do have a few reservations because today we are using energy schedules, so we believe there is a machine behind that energy that is flowing through that could sign an RA contract. So we believe the methodology we have today based on actual energy schedule, it is a very strong methodology, but we're willing to consider changes due to liquidity. We just couldn't find a right way to use publicly available data to improve the methodology that we have. So because we have to go to the board November meeting, we don't have too much time to explore additional stuff. If anybody can come up with any other things, we can consider maybe next year or whenever we pick this up again. But the idea is that at this point in time, we just don't have enough details to move forward with changes to the methodology based on liquidity at a certain branch groups. Anybody has any questions on this one? Okay, let's move to the next one.
Any questions?
Thank
I'm sorry,
you. It's okay. So I'll just open it up to any stakeholders if anybody wants to talk about any general issues before after this I'm going to turn it over to Jordan and we're going to move to the tariff language, draft tariff language. Sorry.
I see one caller in the queue. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, Catalin. This is Brad Van Cleave with Valley Electric.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thank you. I had a question about one of the responses to the stakeholder comments. It's on page 17, and it's a response to one of the DMM questions, and they raise the issue of small LSEs with dynamically scheduled external RA resources that can't get enough MIC due to their load ratio share limitations. And the ISO's response was that those LSEs should have been dedicating their energies to signing contracts with RA resources located in the ISO. And I guess my question is, given the lack of liquidity in the RA market, shouldn't we want to encourage the import of high quality, dynamically scheduled RA resources? And I'm thinking of resources like Hoover. And why would we want to try to limit those imports, since they would generally improve the the availability of RA?
Thank you, Brad. So we do consider that pseudoties and dynamically schedule are some of the best imports we can have, and they are given priority. Actually, anybody with contracts of new use import commitment can get, multi-year reservation at the branch group where they have these contracts. So actually, right now they're the only ones who can get reservation at the branch group going forward on a full basis. So you have to have a pseudotie contract with a pseudotie or dynamically schedule. What we cannot do is, we went through the process in the last 2 years, and the great majority of the LSEs and the stakeholders wanted to maintain the low share ratio. So if anybody, I think that the comment there was about people being above their low share ratio. So if you are above your low share ratio, you would have to find trading from a third party in order to use those commitments. And starting next year, what we are proposing here is to make sure that we have enough. So for example, if you are bringing the schedules on a branch group where we don't even have enough deliverability on that branch group, then now starting next year we'll be increasing that deliverability on those interties if there's available, in order to make sure we have enough. Now, once we have enough to cover all the contracts, then the idea is that you'll just have to, if you're above your low share ratio, you'll have to find a counterparty. Somebody will be getting that allocation, even if you might not be getting it, but somebody will be getting that allocation, and then you'll have to basically trade for it if you're above your low share ratio.
So if a LSE was requesting an increase in MIC for a contract that was in excess of its load ratio share, that wouldn't limit their ability to make that request?
It does not. You can submit requests to increase MIC with any RA contract that you have today. It doesn't matter of your low share ratio. As long as they're not accounted for as pre-RA import commitments or new use import commitments, we already know what those are, so don't resubmit those. We made them public on our website, but if they're not accounted in any one of those, or you have been partially denied one of those, you can show your contract, and if deliverability is available, we'll increase deliverability on those interties to make sure that all the contracts can be accounted for.
Okay, thank you.
On to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, Catalan. It's Ellen Wolf with Rosero Consulting again. I wanted to piggyback on Brad's question a little bit, because I too found the DMM's comments in this last round really fascinating, especially the analysis they did. I know early on you folks had said that you thought the improvements in transparency would, well, those coupled with the changes to RA policy about forced outages would likely increase liquidity. But what the DMM's analysis seemed to suggest is that rights holders often hold these rights and rarely use them. And given the response that you provided in the comment matrix, as Brad mentioned, you didn't really address that. And so I'm wondering, you did say in the paper that you might take this up later. I'm wondering if you can offer any more commitment about revisiting the liquidity and the continued holding of rights, keeping this capacity out of the market and the impacts that might be having on RA prices and RA liquidity. If you might be willing to commit to take that up at some point in the future, some point certain.
So this was one item that we had discussions on in this last few iterations, and the majority of the stakeholders did not want it forced trading or force taken back. It does add to a lot of the process. It complicates the process a lot. So people preferred to wait and see. So we believe that transparency and improvements should mostly take care of that. Now, what we did committed is that, we have to wait for a few years to see how it works out after it's implemented. But if it still, doesn't result in a better outcome than what we have today, then we could come back and change the process again. Sure.
So that sounds a little different than what I thought I read in the paper, which was that right now you don't have the time to do it by the time this is filed. I'm not sure why you would need 2 years to see if this works or not. It seems like you ought to be able to tell the first year if it's effective.
Yeah, so first we need to implement it, and then we need to wait to see what the results are. So that's what I said, a couple of years. But yeah, I agree with you. We need to take a look at it, and pick it up at some later time if it doesn't solve most of the problems that we have. If the current proposal solves most of the problems that we have, then that should be fine. But if it doesn't, and the MM data still shows that we're people are holding onto stuff and not making showings with them, then we need to rethink. Anything is possible in the future.
Okay, I continue to urge you to be open-minded about this, because at the price of RA these days, waiting a couple of years with, a non-trivial amount of RA availability that could be brought in, not being able to be brought in, could have a really high impact on LSE's cost of service. Thanks.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Catalin, it's Chris from CES. Again, I did have another question after hearing Brad and Ellen. I did want to kind of ask a little bit more about this MIC expansion process to try to understand it just a little bit more now, thinking about it. I am curious as to when you say that the ISO is going to potentially increase the MIC on like the individual branch group, and then there was that discussion about that Carrie was asking about where you wouldn't be removing some from another branch group or transferring it from one to the other. So I guess my question is, during the actual whole MIC process, that 13-step process, when you're doing the calculations, like where does this whole piece come in? Is this like a pre-RA commitment that then is going to be expanded at like a policy-driven project or something where you just increase the MIC level outside of the actual calculation itself, and then it's added in and kept protected into the future, like a pre-RA commitment? Is that a good way to describe this, or could you clarify that?
That's a good way to describe that. So the way I envision this is that we will sometime at the beginning of the year would allow for people to make these requests, and then we would know what they are, and we can test them when we test deliverability, for example, for next year. When we do the NQC deliverability study, it's done with both internal resources and the interties, so we can test if there is enough available to increase from those branch groups, and if it is, we'll just make it available. If it's not, then we have to look at in the future if there are any transmission projects already approved that might increase that, and if there is any deliverability available, then so we'll have to kind of work it through kind of a queuing process. But we wanted to make sure that at least if there are already financial commitments made by people, that we do have enough available on certain branch groups, especially if it's just a matter of making it available. That should be kind of automatic. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to try to understand the dynamic, because it seems like the total MIC number isn't really going to change unless you like have an extra adder on top of it that you're going to keep adding to the calculated amount every year. Does that make sense? Am I thinking about it wrong, or are you planning to do something along those lines?
Yeah, so people can request increases every year, but we're going to look at everything that we have. We're just not going to look at the increase in the request. I'm going to look at how much is available on that branch group, if there is enough remaining input capability available to make room for all the contracts. I'm going to look at the policy portfolios. you have to look at all of them together and figure out is there enough capacity to make it available for everybody, and then we're gonna be able to release it. Again, as I explained, this is not gonna by itself. It's not gonna trigger a new type of transmission approval. It's just gonna be making it available when it's there.
Okay, so maybe it would be better for me to think about it in the sense of, let's say you've got your total MIC number. Let's just say it's 15,000 megawatts, and then you've got all of your existing PRA commitments and ETCs and TORs that you kind of protect for in each branch group. If someone brings you this request and says, hey, I've got this commercial interest, I've done this contract externally, and I want to import this resource for RA purposes, but I really need this MIC, and then you guys see that as available on that intertie perhaps before the whole allocation process, then this is basically a way for those folks to basically step in and have a similar treatment to a existing pre-RA commitment or the ETC or TOR, where that would basically just reduce the amount that's available to everyone else under the standard MIC allocation process or the RIC process piece of it.
No.
Does that make sense?
No, not at all. Everything you just said is false. I'm sorry. Let me try.
Okay.
Let me try to repeat what I said before. Submitting a request to increase MIC conveys no priority whatsoever in the market or in the MIC allocation process. The only thing that submitting a request does is make sure that we have enough capacity on the interties to account for all the contracts. The allocation still goes based on the allocation process that we have today. Nobody submitting a request gets any favor comparing to anything else. Their contract does not qualify as pre-RA commitment, it does not qualify as new use simple commitment. Their contract doesn't do anything other than assuring that that branch group has enough capabilities. So the way you should look at this, Chris, is like, let's say we have a branch group today that is 1,000 megawatts. We have 800 megawatts of contracts already there and 200 megawatts of remaining import capability. And somebody comes in and says, well, I already signed a 500 megawatt contract on this branch group. You have no room for me. So then we're going to say, okay, really, there's only 200 available. So even if you wanted to get the rights from somebody else, you cannot get them because it's not enough. So now what we're saying is, okay, so we definitely need 300 more. So we can test if we have 300 more to give out. If we have 300 more to give out, then we'll increase that branch group to 1,300 and we'll make 1,300 available. But the process to allocate MIC stays the same.
Okay, I got it, Kalen. I think, let me jump in here then. Okay, so thank you for the example. I don't want to belabor this too much, but I guess just to try to put a finer point on what I'm wondering then is, because you just said that you would increase that branch group from 1,000 megawatts of MIC to 1,300 megawatts of MIC, then it's my understanding in the process, and maybe I just have a misunderstanding here, but then you would either be increasing the total MIC amount by 300 now after this, or you would be somehow having to protect that amount through one of the processes, and then the other branch groups would then be reduced by that 300 amount. Am I thinking about it wrong?
It's the first one. We will be increasing MIC by 300 megawatts.
Okay. That's what I was trying to ask at the beginning. Maybe I wasn't just asking it clearly, but that's what I thought would happen. It's like basically an adder to the total MIC amount at the beginning. Once you've identified this additional need, although you may have calculated the total MIC being 15,000, then in the end after this, you've now upped that to maybe 15,300 in this example. That's my understanding of it, and I think you just confirmed that, and I think I can let it go at this point, but I just wanted to make sure, because that was where it just didn't seem like it was totally connecting, that there might be some area where the numbers weren't adding up in my head, and this clarifies it. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Carrie Bentley with WPTF. Can you hear me?
Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
Thanks. So following up on what Chris said, so that extra amount from the MIC, that's still allocated based on load ratio share, it sounds like?
Yes, it just basically increases, like Chris said, MIC is now not 1,500, 500, now it's 1,500, 800, and that gets divide it to all the load serving entities with the same method we have today.
Did you consider not making that available on load ratio share and giving priority to anyone who has an RA contract? It seems like you go through all this effort to ensure that there's sufficient MIC to support the contract, but if other LSEs don't want to sell that additional capability, the RA ends up stranded anyway.
Yeah, so we thought about that and we discussed about that the last couple of years, and the majority were against that because they are paying for transmission altogether, and the majority wanted to continue to have the load share ratio. Actually, that was the first proposal would come up last year, and it was heavily shut down by everybody. So we stayed with the load share ratio. So the load share ratio will still stay forward, but we make sure we have enough capacity. And now it's up to the LSE to figure out how to either get the rights through the allocation to themselves or trade from somebody else.
And I guess you don't see an issue with that from just a pure economic efficiency perspective. I mean, access to transmission shouldn't be, the ability to monopolistically hoard transmission either. Right? Like there are certain principles in allocating transmission, and I see to a certain extent why you initially allocate on load ratio share. But to the point where you strand RA seems too far, right?
Yes, thank you for your comment. At this point in time, we will not be making that change.
I think that's something that we'll probably take up at FERC. We'll have to consider that. I apologize for coming in late to this, but I have to say I didn't really understand the proposal until you went over it today and Chris walked through all the details. And then the final question I had is, did you do any sort of estimates on, how this would increase ratepayer costs or how much of an issue this is actually going to be? You suggested that there were LSEs who already were indicating to you that they had RA contracts. Did you do a magnitude analysis or anything that you can make public?
No, we didn't do a magnitude analysis. One of the LSEs put it in their writing in their comments, so you can go through that.
Okay, thank you.
Moving on to the next caller. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Mary Lynch with Constellation. And what I'm missing, Catalin, is if someone comes in and requests a MIC expansion and it's available, why wasn't it available at the beginning? What was it in the study that had you not allocating that from the very beginning? Is it because there's an upgrade necessary for the expansion?
Yeah, so deliverability is tested from the intertie all the way to the aggregate of load. We are running hundreds and thousands of contingencies. You actually have to tell how much you want ahead of time. This is not like a transfer path where you maximize that single path for a transfer. These imports are coming from all over the place, from Northern California to Palo Verde to Meade, and we have to run hundreds of contingencies across the system. So, the way deliverability works is you actually have to give the input what deliverability is in order to test it along with the rest of the resources in the ISO. And we do have new resources inside the ISO every year.
So something that an expansion that you grant at one point in time might not be available later?
That's correct. It could happen.
And then what happens to someone who locked their, MIC for a multi-year period? Do they risk losing it?
Now that part is not going to happen because we already locked, as I said, the pre-RA import commitments and the new use import commitments. Those are already locked in, and that deliverability is not getting lost through any other stuff. Now, if we are testing for increases, it might come up that any increase you want to do and may be available for 1 or 2 years and then be taken away later on because there were other projects in the queue that were ahead of this this increase on this intertie, so that could play there. But nobody who already has pre-RA import commitments or new use import commitments that are already locked down, that's not going to get lost. That's not going to get released. That's not for use. I was just trying to talk about this potential that now people are submitting these extra requests for certain branch group, and if we have anything available, we give it away, but it might only be for a few years, and it might have to wait for some transmission upgrades, might not be available right away. So there could be some interplay there if you submit these new requests. I'm not saying that will always be available, forever there, but once it's there, we'll start getting it protected, except there could be other people in the queue already there, ahead of this one in the queue. So it's kind of you kind of have to look at the whole thing on an aggregate basis and try to figure it out. How much is available now? How much is available later?
Okay, but once something's granted to someone, it's granted to them for a term, and then it's protected.
Yes, once somebody has either a pre-RA import commitment or has locked it down as new use import commitments, those do not go away.
Okay, but they may not get it for the whole term that they would like to have it. They may only get it for a partial term. Is that right?
No, usually if it qualifies as new use import commitment, it will get it for the full term.
Okay. Thank you.
I do not see any further callers in the queue. As a reminder, if you're connected to the computer audio or use the Call Me feature in WebEx, you may enter the question queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a notification. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. But if you're connected just on the phone line and not on the WebEx audio, please make sure to press #2 on your telephone keypad to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question.
I see Ellen hand. Okay, now it's gone. Okay, thank you. Isabella, can you please turn it over to Jordan to go through the tariff? Thank you.
I have the tariff pulled up, so Jordan, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. Thanks, Isabella. So why don't you go ahead and pull up the first section where we have changes, and as you're doing that, I'll just let everybody know that, so this is obviously based off of the last round of the proposal that we had. We're trying to get these tariff changes out to you as early as possible. We don't expect this to be the final tariff language, obviously, and I fully expect that we'll have another round of this to present to you all in the future. So consider this a first draft, and we can make any changes we need as we go forward. And then the last thing I'll say is just that I think as far as the substantive changes go, I think, those were discussed previously with Catalin. I think what we're looking for here is to make sure that the substantive policy changes that we are planning to make are accurately reflected in the tariff. So with those disclaimers, I will go ahead and start going through Section 24 of the tariff, which talks about the import capability expansion request specifically. And in the section here that you have before you, this is just simply saying that the import expansion request should be submitted with comments in the draft study plan, which is early on in the annual transmission planning process. Go ahead and go to the next section, Isabella. Again, here, this just incorporates the import capability expansion study request into early on in the transmission planning process. Comments can be submitted at the same time that parties submit comments on the economic planning study request here. We can move on to the next one before we take questions. And then this is a new section of the tariff that we've used to explain what should be in the import capability expansion request. And who can actually request the import capability expansion request. So it's limited to LSCs that have existing RA contracts that are not fully accounted for in the pre-RA import commitment or new use commitment process. and then new transmission owners connecting to the ISO. And I do have a note here based on the discussion that we had before that was brought up about possibly including in this folks that are tied to the transmission grid specifically in this Part B here. So I think that we'll consider that when we go through the next draft of the comments as well. And then at the end of this section, we also provide that the import capability expansion request should provide information that will be defined in the business practice manuals. So I think that covers it for the Section 24 changes. Isabella, is there anything else in Section 24? Go to it now. Otherwise, let's take some questions on the Section 24 changes.
As a reminder, if you're connected to the computer audio or using the Call Me feature in WebEx, you may enter the question queue by using the WebEx raise hand icon located just above the chat panel. You'll hear a beep tone when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question. If you're just on the phone line and not using the WebEx audio, please dial #2 on your phone to enter the question queue. You'll hear a notification when your line is unmuted. At that time, please state your name and question.
So I'm not hearing anything. So if we don't have any questions on Section 24, we can go ahead and move to Section 40. And Isabel, yeah, go ahead and take us to the first set of changes. Okay, so this first set of changes here in Section 40 basically lays out the process for how load-serving entities with existing RA contracts can receive priority over other requests that are received the same day. So this essentially lays out that priority process that we had discussed. Isabel, would you page down a little bit to the next page? Again, this is just discussing that priority specifically. Go on to the next one. Okay, and these changes are mostly cleanup changes here about what we're going to be posting on our website and how we're going to be posting that information on the website. So just kind of makes it a more general process for us to post that information on our website. The next section here, 40.4.6.2.2.3, is talking about the specific information that we'll be providing as far as transparency goes. And the addition here is that we'll be providing the updated list of import capability holders, the megawatt quantity held at each branch group level. And we'll also be posting the aggregate import capability usage at the branch group level after the RA validations. And did we have any more changes, Isabel, or was that it?
That was it.
Okay. So any questions on Section 40, the changes that we have there? Okay, hearing none.
I'm sorry,
okay.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was going to say, assuming that we have no questions, that will wrap it up for this round of the tariff language. And yeah, as I said, we'll be revising it as necessary, and we will be presenting another round of the tariff language before we go in for the FERC filing, most certainly. So I will pass it back to Isabella now to take over.
Sure. Thanks, Jordan. So here's our initiative schedule. So we will be taking comments on the draft final proposal and draft tariff language up until October 4th. So again, the comments template is available out on the initiative webpage. and we have that linked on the next slide as well. We are targeting October 11th to post the final proposal, and then we'll have our final stakeholder call on the 18th. And then we have our Board of Governors meeting on November 3rd and 4th, and we will file the tariff language at FERC following board approval. Again, comments due by October 4th. Here is the link to the initiative webpage where you can find the comments template. And then I just have a couple extra slides that I wanted to share with you all before we conclude. So if you are not aware already, the ISO did recently launch a Energy Matters blog, which provides timely insights into the ISO grid and market operations, as well as other industry-related news. A link to that blog is provided here on this slide. You can also subscribe to the blog, and that is linked on this slide as well. We just highlighted a recent post that we did on September 14th regarding storage and the intersection between reliability today and climate goals of tomorrow. So if you haven't already, we encourage you to check that out and subscribe. And then the other announcement I have today.
Yep. I'm sorry, actually, I see a caller in the queue right now. Do you want to take the question now?
Sure, just how about after I get through this slide and then we can open it up for last questions.
Okay, sure.
Okay, thanks, Shreya. So then the last announcement that I have today is for the Extended Day Ahead Market Forum. So we are holding this virtual webinar event. It's free on October 13th from 8:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And the objective of the virtual event is to have a robust regional discussion on the EDM initiative, and then the common challenges and opportunities that stakeholders are facing in the Western interconnection. So the forum will provide industry leaders and utility representatives, policymakers, and stakeholders across the West with the opportunity to share their perspectives on key concepts and principles that are critical to the development of an EDM framework. So if you haven't registered for the event already, you can do so by visiting the Extended Day Ahead Market Forum webpage on the ISO website. The page is linked here on this slide, and you can register there. Again, it is free, and we just ask that you please register by October 12th. And if you have any questions, you can send those to ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com, which is the email here on this slide. So I will open it up for any last questions. So maybe we can take the one from Ellen.
Sure. Caller, please go ahead. Your line is unmuted.
Hi, it's Ellen Wolf. I just had a couple of process questions, and I apologize if you put out this information, I missed it. Do you want feedback on the tariff language through some different mechanism than the stakeholder comment portal?
No, we will take all the comments through the commenting tool. So in the template, there are a set of questions that relate directly to the draft final proposal, as well as a set of questions. Yeah, so they'll all be in the same template.
Okay, I know Ellen invited us to submit some tariff language modification suggestions. I imagine we're welcome to submit those in advance of the comment deadline, if that would be helpful.
Yes, that's fine.
And then I think I also saw, I was looking through the slides and didn't see it again, something BPM language. Do you have any sense of when you'll make the BPM language available? Some of these provisions seem like they have some subtleties, and seeing the language might be helpful in us understanding language and deciding whether we're comfortable with the tariff language the way that you've drafted it. That was a question, if you didn't hear my question, of when you think you might have the BPM language available.
This is Catalyst. At this point in time, we don't have a schedule for the BPM, for the draft BPM language before the board meeting.
So it's likely you'll go forward to the board before the BPM is made available for discussion.
I believe that's what it is scheduled for right now.
How about, do you expect the BPM language to be available before you file the tariff languages for?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Not see any further questions in the queue as of now.
Okay, thanks, Shreyas. Well, if there are no further questions, then that will conclude today's stakeholder call. Thank you all for your participation, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.